Okay, everybody, welcome back. This is episode 21 of Junior Resource Investing. Before we get going, as always, I will start with a disclaimer here. As always, again, this is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. My guests are not financial advisors. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only. Due to the nature of this discussion, there will be blue sky conversation, so just please be aware of that. For full disclaimer, please check YouTube notes below. Otherwise, though, I am pleased to present our latest guest, Ewan Webster. Ewan is the president and CEO of Thesis Gold. Thesis Gold is a primary gold explorer whose core project is the prolific ranch project in BC's Golden Horseshoe, which consists of epithermal gold deposits and possible underlying porphyry mineral systems. It continues to put out impressive mine-making results in a district ripe for consolidation. It trades on the TSXV under the ticker TAU, and on the OTC in the U.S. under the ticker THSGF. Ewan, it's nice to chat with you today. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
Very well. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, nice to be here as well.
Yeah, and I always appreciate the time that CEOs take to meet with you here today. So, yes, thank you for that. Place I always start, and I'll start here with you. If we had to consolidate all this interview down into 30 seconds, and you had 30 seconds to pitch this to investors, how would you describe Thesis Gold and its story and why it's compelling?
Yeah, good one to start with. So Thesis Gold is focused on its 100% owned Ranch Gold project, which is a high-grade, near-surface epithermal gold deposit that is road accessible in the emerging Toodoggone mining camp. We've got a very tight share structure. We've got a long shareholder base. We've got about 15 million in the treasury. We're looking towards another significant drill program in 2023 as we work towards a maiden resource, likely in early 2024.
Yeah, so lots, like you say, fully cashed up, so ready to roll, hit the ground running with that in the new year. And 12 months, 18 months, we've got some exciting catalysts coming up for you. Your personal history is perhaps more relevant than many CEOs in terms of their immediate company at hand. Why don't you just walk us through your background and why that matters so much to Thesis?
Sure, yeah. I guess, as you probably gathered, I'm Scottish. Grew up just outside Glasgow. First class honours degree in earth science from the University of Glasgow. And then from there, moved to Canada to pursue a PhD at the University of Calgary. I think I was one of the only hard rock people there, focused on a big project in southeast BC, basically looking at tectonics and how the areas or deposits fit into the tectonic history over the last couple 100 million years. Great project. Pretty quickly realized I didn't want to be an academic though. I was doing the PhD, and then kind of transitioned out of that into mineral exploration. And for a few years I just worked as a consultant for a number of different public companies, and then I joined the metals group of companies probably 4-ish years ago now. And my kind of main role initially, and I think this is kind of what you were alluding to, is basically being the senior geologist for Benchmark Metals, which is the company just the south of our Ranch Gold project. They have the Lawyers project there. So, I started working with John Williamson and Jim at Benchmark early on. We started out there with about 100,000 ounces underground, high-grade ounces, and that had been a past producer. And we recognized that there was probably a lot more potential there than it had been given credit for, and I helped take that from that initial resource through to the 3.6 million ounces that they now have. But somewhere along that path, had the opportunity to get the Ranch project, and essentially stepped away from Benchmark to become the CEO of Thesis Gold. And we really built Thesis Gold around the Ranch project. So hopefully that gives you a pretty quick intro to me anyway.
Mm. Well, I may step away from my script here and jump ahead to, do you mind running through the genesis of the Ranch project? My understanding was it was a series of disparate land packages that have been consolidated kind of for the first time in recent history. But I mean, when you were at Benchmark, was it always something that you were kind of gazing north at this land, or how did it come about that you kind of circled this area as something you wanted to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always recognized the potential there to the north, and uh, it's actually the same vendor of the project, both lawyers and the ranch project. It was held by private guardsman resources, and maybe I'll step back in time a little bit. So,
Mm.
the disparate land positions that you talked to, yeah, I think both lawyers and particularly ranch had seen, a number of different operators through the early days of exploration in the Toodoggone, so the 60s, the 70s, and ultimately in the early 90s when gold prices were depressed and exploration essentially dried up in the Toodoggone, and guardsmen saw the opportunity there. They basically consolidated those two land positions to effectively what they are today, or pretty close anyway. And then they held them for kind of 20 plus years. John Williamson at Benchmark managed to deal with guardsmen, got the lawyers project, and then subsequently managed to deal with Doug Guardsman and get the ranch project. So yeah.
And then, so I guess maybe just to finish off the conversation, I guess briefly around Benchmark versus Thesis. I mean, are they two arm's length companies? Is there overlap in ownership? I mean, does Benchmark have a position in Thesis, or vice versa, or yeah, just friendly neighbors, or is it more to it than that, more formal?
Just friendly neighbors. I mean, completely separate boards, management teams, and there's no. I don't own a position, or Thesis doesn't own a position of Benchmark, and vice versa. But there are a lot of benefits, because we have that great relationship. Then we essentially, there's a lot of cost saving there in terms of just logistical support. We use the same drill contractor, the same geological crew through Apex Geoscience. So certainly some big cost savings to be had by that kind of beneficial relationship.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess because it is kind of, for me, kind of a part one, part two of the thesis for your own exploration. I'm going to have to work hard not to continue to make that really bad pun over and over again. But that you are the former head of exploration for Benchmark. You step into this role as CEO at Thesis. I mean, so obviously, if you're listening at home, this is part of what kind of perks my ears up. Is that obviously there's pretty high conviction then that there's must be something economic down there, right? So, I mean, could you just talk through maybe yourself and your geo team? I mean, just, what drew your eyes specifically? Had you done, was there above ground or historical assays that you were looking at? And maybe let's just pause there, and I'll have a follow-up question for you there. But yeah, just what actually got you there, and who are you working alongside with? Sure.
So, at Benchmark, when I started out, we developed this exploration toolkit model, whatever you want to call it, but it was essentially very systematic exploration across the land position, and that's what that project and the ranch project hadn't seen that at all. So, it proved to be very effective on the lawyers project, and then, as we got the opportunity to get the ranch project, it shared a lot of the same characteristics, where the perception was very high grade mineralization right at surface, but it was small, and there wasn't a lot of potential to really grow that system. And that was the same kind of thinking that existed for Benchmark's Lawyers project, where it was high grade underground, and that's all it was ever going to be. But we recognized that, hey, around these high grade cores that they were mining underground, you have 100 meters ish of pretty continuous mineralization flanking them. And that's now evolved into what will hopefully be a large open pit mine one day. So it was a very kind of similar story with ranch. As I said, high grade, some phenomenal drill results at surface, but of isolated pods of mineralization. And historically, when they were exploring on the ranch project, the whole epithermal porphyry system was kind of poorly understood. Like that continuum, essentially, it's one system, and the high sulfidation epithermal part of it is just the upper parts of the system. And I don't think that was quite understood then. You know, also one of the key things was the structural control on the mineralization. You know, there essentially wasn't a structural model. It had basically been completely overlooked, and that was one thing that worked very well for us at Lawyers, and I think even more so at Ranch, has just been understanding the structural controls on the mineralization. And, you know, that came from the very systematic exploration that we were doing on the project, you know, detailed ground magnetics, geophysics, mapping, LiDAR interpretation of lineaments, etc., to really build up that framework. And from there, you know, you're in a position to much more effectively test and try and expand that mineralized footprint. And I think we've certainly demonstrated this year that is the case. The mineralization is growing, and I think it's turning in a pretty significant gold system.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I want to talk about your fresh take on old ground, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it seems like every week you're releasing 100 meters of a gram per ton, right? So been just consistently impressive assay results coming out. Maybe just as a quick aside, you know, 2022 drilling season is wrapped up for you, but you're still awaiting quite a few assays. Do you mind kind of running through what's left?
There is probably about 25%, I think, of the assays left in the lab at the moment. Right now, they're telling us that they should all be complete by the end of February. And then ideally, as soon as we get those in, we just compile them, turn them around, and get them back out to shareholders as soon as possible. But somewhere in that 25% range, I think.
Sure. And out of it was roughly 120 or so that went into 2022?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was 119 or thereabouts.
Okay. And so why don't we, just to finish off this as an introduction to the ranch project, you know, because there was a lot of historical drilling, right? A lot of drill holes, but obviously wasn't, like you say, that they didn't understand the nature of the porphyry system. They didn't understand what they were doing. Do you mind, is it as simple as that, you know, you've already kind of referenced this, right? It's new technology, new exploration, above and below ground exploration, and then just bringing these new technologies to bear. I mean, I guess, and then what else did you do differently, I guess, after that?
Yeah, so, I mean, there was about 34,000 meters of historical drilling on the project, and a number of probably 4 or 5 different zones, and they actually produced about 10,000 ounces of gold from 3 small open pits. And they were maybe only like 50 meters long and a couple of meters deep. But the subsequent drill programs by the different operators through the kind of 70s and 80s, and then a little bit of drilling in the 2007, you know, they just went back and effectively re-drilled the same system or same zones. And, you know, the one thing that they couldn't understand or get their head around was the fact that, you know, the gold zones in places are fed by, you know, faults. So the fluid comes up the fault, but then in places that fluid had gone out and moved along particular rock units. But historically, they drilled through these zones and come out the bottom and just thought, well, you know, the mineralization doesn't continue to depth. And that's kind of what the outcome of that 2007 drill program was. They said, well, there's no more potential to extend the Bonanza zone, for example. What we've done, and, you know, I think how that thinking has evolved is, one, we really understand high sulfidation systems and the controls on, you know, certainly that stratigraphic part that I was telling you about, but also more importantly, the faults that control with those gold-bearing fluids as they came up. But it was the kind of systematic exploration. So, as I said, I think probably the best exploration tool is a combination of detailed ground magnetics. And what that does is basically it picks out the faults. And, you know, it does a fantastic job of picking out these lineaments. Then if you pair that with mapping, so you've kind of ground truth where these structures might be, and also IP. And the IP, what we're looking for is basically one of the responses, which is resistivity, and that is picking out zones of effectively silica alteration. And I know this is getting a little bit technical, but it's that silica alteration paired with the structures, paired with, you know, the interpretation and mapping on surface, that gives us a lot of confidence in where to drill. So from that, we were able to basically extrapolate, where that mineralization might be going, and essentially targeted that this year, or last year now, I guess. And we've extended the zones of mineralization at Bonanza. We've shown how that now interconnects with the ridge zone. We've shown the offsets on that system with other structures and different orientations, how those are mineralized as well. So it's really just a kind of a greater understanding of what the controls of mineralization are, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And yeah, I think you referenced it well yourself, right? That if I think I dug out Guardsman's report on the land package, and it was rather dismal in terms of its kind of the prospectivity, right? It was rather negative on the future prospectivity, which of course you this past year have just kind of proven it almost entirely incorrect, right? And again, this is if you go back and listen to other conversations, I always talk about a working geological thesis, and this is why, Brian, what I find so compelling about your company is that you have, like you just referenced it yourself, right? Ground magnetics, mapping, IP correlating together, and you have this working thesis that every time you drill, it further validates this thesis for your company, and for me that becomes compelling as an investor, because obviously when you still have prospectivity in other zones and targets, then there is, of course, there's nothing certain here, but there's increased confidence because it's already been tested so well, right? So I think that it's not obviously not just a science project, but the level of rigor that you've brought to this, it seems like it's paid off in massive dividends thus far.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I think a good example of how well this works outside of the known zones of mineralization would be, this year's discovery of the Steve zone, where we applied that same thinking, that same exploration work to new targets out with the historically drilled areas and made a new discovery. So I think, that really demonstrates how effective that has been.
Mm-hmm. Well, and maybe, like I say, I'm kind of going backwards here. I usually end my conversations surrounding exploration and such. But, I mean, so I guess I have a two-part question. I do want to know what you're doing next, in terms of infill or step outs or just entirely new targets. But why don't you, just to set the table, because 2022 was a fairly transformative year. It was 50,000 meters, if I'm not incorrect, as you say, in 119 holes. So, 400 meters? Am I in the ballpark, 400 meters per hole?
It ended up being about 40,000 meters of drilling, so 50,000 was our target, and we ended up shutting the program down a little bit early, just with other people pulling out of the Tooting and stuff. I didn't want to, and given the current market conditions in the fall, I didn't want to be responsible solely for keeping the road open. So decided to conserve some capital, went for the 40,000 meters. But as you said, they still ends up being some pretty significant holes, and they range from a couple of hundred meters through to, we have some holes that are down 750 meters. So, and then a bit of everything in between.
So so 40,000 meters, roughly speaking, still a very important kind of turning point in terms of the drilling season for Thesis, I guess. So maybe now we'll return to my initial question: is 2023? Obviously, it seems like you have quite a bevy of kind of opportunities or potential directions to take this. Do you mind, I guess, first of all, maybe this is the simple question, I'll ask you what you're doing with the meters afterwards, but number of drills and number of meters, do you have a notion of what 2023 will look like yet?
Hopefully it's going to look like something similar to 2022. I mean, that's my goal at the moment. And I think given the results that we've got and, how our understanding's evolved this year, I think it certainly warrants that. As to where those meters are going to be allocated and targets and stuff at the moment, I think if we had this conversation again in another month's time when we have all of those assays back, I'd be in a much better position to give you a more definitive answer, let's say. But I think it's going to be continuing to expand Bonanza Ridge, focus on the Thesis structural corridor, with some kind of infill drilling there, as well as expansion drilling along strike, and then follow up on some of the targets that we discovered this year. And there are a lot of other targets that I want to test as well. So to answer your question, something similar to what 2022 was, I'm planning on at the moment.
Sure. So yeah, a mixed, like you say, a mixture of infill to upgrade your resource, step outs along strike, and then some wildcat to test these other previously undrilled targets. That's a fair recap, fair summary.
I think, yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, maybe in a few months I'll get you back on and we can have a better conversation about what that's going to look like or whatever. Let's scroll back here now. So I guess maybe why don't we talk about where you are? I mean, you're obviously far north in BC. Tutagon, Golden Horseshoe. Is it FIFO? It's not FIFO. It's not fly in, fly out, or is it? What does it take to get to your land package?
So Tutagon is completely road accessible, and so is the ranch project as of last year. There was a road onto the project historically, and that's where they put that road in to do that 10,000 ounces that they mined out of there back in the early 90s. But after that, they deactivated the road and pulled out the bridge over the Tutagon River, which is between Benchmark's Lawyers project and the ranch project to the north. So we worked with the local First Nations last year, and the government got that re-permitted and reactivated the road onto the project last year. So it's completely road accessible. There's a power line tie-in just to the south of us at Centerra Gold's Kemess Copper Gold Porphyry. And there's an airstrip that's basically on the southern end of Benchmark's Lawyers project. So you have the option to drive in, fly in. It's given from where it is, it's about 450 kilometers northwest of Prince George. The infrastructure is actually fantastic. I would add as well that it's not the kind of rugged coastal mountains of British Columbia that you might imagine. It is rolling hills, very limited vegetation, and a kind of subalpine to alpine. And we're in the kind of rain shadow of the coastal mountains as well, so we get a fraction of the snowpack that they get on the coast. So it is more than possible to work year round.
Now, you anticipated a follow-up question here as this discussion of drilling season. Now, possible to work year-round versus practical to work year-round. I mean, what is it a practical 12-month season, or how if you had your druthers and you weren't waiting for assays, which everybody seems to be waiting for assays for years now, right? But waiting for assays notwithstanding, is it a realistic 12-month season, or what's that actually look like on the ground?
I think, no, it is a realistic 12-month season. I mean, last year, that 40,000 meters, 5,000 of that was actually drilled as a spring program in kind of March and April. And while, parts of the project were frozen and under snow, it's certainly feasible to do that. Benchmark has worked year-round before on their Lawyers project. Really, it comes down to cost analysis. I mean, if there's other people in the area that are going to operate year-round, then we can split expenses for whatever's required for road maintenance and keeping things going, logistics, etc. But this year, nobody else in the Tutagon was kind of doing a winter program, so I didn't want to have Thesis pay for that expense by ourselves. But you can definitely operate year-round.
Perfect. Yeah, so it is just a matter of practicality, and I think that's understandable, right? Shouldering expenses unnecessarily just to get a couple more drills in, right? Rather than waiting and being more responsible with shareholder capital.
That's exactly it. That is exactly it.
So why don't you, a decent segue, I mean, of course, it's Northern BC, so cost per meter is going to be elevated, but can you give us a all-in price for cost per meter to drill?
All in, last year was about $420 a meter. And I think that's going to come down quite a bit this year, even with inflation, etc., because, part of the program was helicopter supported. This year, we're not going to have that need at all. As I mentioned, we've just put that road back in. It's going to be completely road access only. So those costs should drop, which, if you think about the rest of BC, $420 a meter is pretty good as is. And for that to come down even further, I think we're probably one of the lowest cost of drilling.
Yeah, no, that was surprisingly low for what I was potentially expecting. So where am I going from here? I wanted to ask you about maybe let's just circle back to jurisdiction and relationships with local Indigenous communities. Obviously, it's BC. Obviously, that's a very complex and ever-evolving sort of conversation, right? What is your relationship with local communities? Are there collaboration agreements that you've signed with them, or you're in the process of working through that, or can you just kind of discuss where you're at with that aspect?
Yeah, sure. So there's 4 local nations in the area: the Tahltan, Sekidani, Quadacha, and Takla. So we have a communications and engagement in place with the Tahltan, and then the other 3 nations are collectively called the Sekene, and we have a trilateral agreement in place with those 3 nations. And we had these agreements in place prior to even beginning our exploration program back in 2021. And we've kind of been working hand in hand with the local nations. We use the environmental wing of 2 of the nations, so Saskatchewan and Chukchi Environmental, to do basically all of our wildlife monitoring, kind of baseline studies, etc. And actually the engineering side of Chukchi Environmental, one of the groups, they actually got the contract, in part with Saskatchewan as well, I guess, to do all of the road rehabilitation and reactivation. So they are getting a lot of the work on the project as well. And I think last year we employed, I think about 20+% of our workforce was local nations on the project.
Nice. Perfect. So, First Nations who are supportive and understanding of the economic benefits of playing along with the project versus more, hesitant or resistant sort of nations that are maybe a bit more suspicious of environmental impacts.
Indeed, yeah.
Sure. I'm just going to circle back here. One question that I had left unanswered or unasked, I suppose. So you are releasing in 2024 tentatively initial resource. Can you just explain? So you've put in 40-some thousand meters last year, and so of course you're having to confirm historical drill assays with some drilling, and then now you're some fresh work yourself now to move forward from that. Can you just give us and of course I know this is going to be forward looking and so you don't have hard numbers, but just roughly speaking, how many meters do you anticipate going into this resource coming up in the next 12 months or plus?
So there was 34,000 meters of drilling historically. Then in 2021, that was our first drill program, and that was about 16,000 meters of drilling, if I remember. And that was quite a lot of confirmation drilling, also testing a couple of new targets and expanding some of the zones. But essentially, that did a great job of confirming the historical results from the 70s and 80s. Then, as you mentioned, this year's program, or last year's program now, 40,000 meters. So collectively, I think that's what adds up to 75, 90,000 meters-ish. If we do another 40,000 meters this year, we're in that 130,000 meter ballpark. But I think the number's kind of meaningless. I mean, really what's important is, is the gold system, what's your drill density? How big a system do you have there? And also, is it still growing? If we get to the end of 2023's summer program, we've made a number of new discoveries again, fingers crossed. The zones of mineralization are continuing to expand. I'm not going to rush to put out a resource. I think it's in the shareholders' best interest for us to continue evaluating and growing that gold footprint. If it looks like we've got a really good handle on the mineralization that we have there, if we've got good drill density and a lot of confidence in it, then 100%, I think that's the next logical step.
And that's, again, you anticipated a question I was going to ask you based on as prospectivity continues to be, closer to blue sky than a ceiling. When does that resource come out? Do you mind explaining? And this is, of course, I know it's an industry standard. Every explorer has to make this decision for themselves, and different strategies approaching this. But to resource or not to resource, right? I guess is the question I have is what's your logic? Why not, right? I mean, obviously, I get it, right? And there's just competing schools of thought. Some people like to update resources, more regularly, and other companies I mean, like, Great Bear, obviously Kodiak. I mean, I guess they're two famous examples of not ever having a resource. But so why? Why not? Why no resource? Why do you think it makes sense for you to continue to drill with the prospectivity there?
I mean, I think Great Bear, just essentially what I was saying 2 seconds ago, is that, they just continue to see the potential of that deposit growing. They were still expanding that footprint and didn't want to rush into putting out a resource because they saw, or they thought, that there was still a lot of upside to be had there. Sometimes I think if you put out a resource, the market may think, this is all we have, and maybe it's not as big as some people anticipated. Maybe it's bigger than others thought. But while there's still a lot of upside there, and you can see a path to growth, and I don't think it's in their best interest to rush into putting out a resource.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he certainly is planting a flag, right? For better or for worse, the market sort of does latch onto those numbers, right? So,
yeah.
No, that's a valid point. So why don't we transition, just talking, so less on the land package, and maybe transition more to the boardroom side of things, pardon me. Just, do you mind running through, again, a nice vet in the cap for Thesis is you do have a fairly nice tight share structure, right? Can you just run through maybe how many shares do you have out, warrants, options in terms of overhang? We'll start there.
Sure, yeah. So they're just under 65 million shares out. So as you said, really tight share structure, and we've worked hard to maintain that. All of the 3 financings I think we've done have been very accretive. So we've been very fortunate in that sense. Warrants, there's just over 500,000 warrants outstanding. They expire late 2024, I think it is, and they are priced at about $2.50-ish, I think. Don't quote me on that. But they were broker warrants, so there's really essentially no warrant overhang there. And then options, I think there's about 1.9 million options at 50 cents, and then there's about another 2 million options at about $1.30, $1.35, kind of split between the 30 and 35. And then there's probably another few 100,000 at about $1.65-ish, I think. So collectively, there's about 3.9 million options out.
So just a few percentage points of your overall share count, which is nice. I always fall prey myself, pardon me, the trap. You have to be long-term thinking in years in this sector, but it's always nice to know that if the stock does run, there's not going to be that overhang to hold it back in the short term, right? So I can't help but sometimes think more short term than probably is good for this sector. But yeah, no, nice to know there's no overhang. Why don't we transition and talk about then? Can you run through insider, institutional, high net worth, who you have who do you have in terms of support, in terms of ownership?
Yeah, so that 64 million shares breaks down into a pretty significant 60%-ish of institutional support. And some of these funds maybe came into the Thesis story a little bit earlier than they normally would. Maybe there's a bit of shareholder overlap between Benchmark and Thesis. I think they were maybe understood or knew me, understood what we were trying to accomplish in the two to gone. ASA Merrick, Franklin Templeton, Eric Sprott's also part as a shareholder as well. And then management and insiders, the board, etc., hold just under 25%, I think. So, we're certainly aligned with shareholders and see really, the long-term goal here and vision for Thesis Gold.
So, 15% for retail, it's a very tightly held structure here, right? So again, you're looking at, geology has to come first, but it's awfully nice when you have that share structure that then back up a healthy re-rate or appreciation if and when that finally happens. So no, that's absolutely a benefit for Thesis for sure. One more question here. This is maybe just for clarification for people that just read headlines and don't read into M&A, MD&A. But you recently had an auditor resign, which can obviously sometimes be seen as a bad omen, right? Why are they resigning? But obviously, in this case, it actually is quite innocent. This is a really quick question, but do you just mind kind of putting on air why did they resign?
So I can't remember the name of the regulatory body that governs auditors, but they're basically only allowed to be the auditor for a specific company for, I think it's 7 years, and then after that they have to step down and resign. So that's basically what happened in our case. It was, as you said, very innocent. The auditor reached that kind of 7-year deadline, stepped down, and we replaced them.
So yeah, not like I say, for people that maybe don't read the MD&A, it could be potentially unsettling, but yeah, very, very innocuous. I want to talk about met testing and your metallurgical work. You've already, this is again, I mean, I have a checklist, right? When I'm running through companies, I have a checklist of, what do they have met work done, and what's the resource, and we talk about correlated above and below ground exploration. For you, again, a check mark for me is the fact that you already have fairly diligent network done. Can you mind running us through the results of that and what that means for your company?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think we maybe got to the met testing a little bit earlier than maybe a lot of companies would, given the position that we are kind of pre-resource, etc. But wanting to get out ahead of that a little bit, high sulfidation epithermal systems can be metallurgically challenging, let's say. And so I wanted to get a handle on this early. Are we facing any problems here? What is that? What does the processing look like? And are there any deleterious elements in there? Thankfully, no deleterious elements. As you noted, the recoveries, from basically, we took composite samples from a range of the different zones as well. So Reg, Bonanza, the Thesis zones, because they all have slightly different characteristics. I mean, they're all high sulfidation epithermal systems, but they range from sulfide content and gold, silver, plus or minus copper. So all of those composite samples are analyzed, and across the board, it was between 90 to 98% recovery. And that is with, I think it's particle size passing, about 80% passing at P80, which is around 74 microns, I think. And then it's a flotation circuit where we create two high-grade concentrates, basically. So a very simple, cost-effective industry norm, let's say.
Yeah, excellent, right? So, and then again, a huge boon that it's a very cheap and simple process to recover. So, again, just kind of another positive aspect for your project here. Yeah, so, indeed. I mean, we're kind of nearing the end of this here, but you talk to copper porphyries. Obviously, it's a buyout they're aiming for. You open pitable potentially, depending on capex. I mean, it's something that you could go it alone, but I mean, you have majors in the area, or you have mids in the area. Centerra's is south of you. I think there's a Freeport JV that's kind of bordering you. I mean, is this, and again, this is going to be tricky asking a CEO this, because it's going to be a question you can't really meaningfully answer. But I mean, are you in the perspective that the Toodoggone, I mean, is it just ripe for consolidation and a takeover, or for you, how far are you prepared to go? I mean, are you prepared to take it all the way to production, or you just think that you're going to polish up the apple for someone else to take the bite out of it?
I mean, as you said, it's kind of a hard one to answer, but
yeah.
I think we've demonstrated that we're certainly capable of raising capital, and we're growing this project. We're moving it forward. We're ticking all the boxes, as we just discussed. Met work. We're working towards that resource. We're making new discoveries. I think, and we'll continue down that path with the resource, and then potentially future engineering work. And if somebody comes along at some point and has any interest in the project, the company, then I'm open to those discussions. But I think it's in our shareholders' best interest for myself and the Thesis team to, continuously move this forward as we're doing, and that way they'll get the best kind of shareholder return. But what I would say is that the Toodoggone, northern BC in general. I mean, as you saw yesterday, Newmont has just made a bid to take out Newcrest for $17 billion. Both of them have been super active in northern BC in the last couple of years, with Newcrest buying Red Chris, Newmont, the Saddle deposit, and also Pretium. I think what this says is that, BC is viewed as extremely attractive jurisdiction to do business in. Is very stable, and I think that M&A is only going to continue over the coming years. And eventually that has to trickle down into our space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're starting to kind of back ourselves into a discussion around kind of global geopolitics, but I think that Peru with their protests around copper right now, and obviously with the Russia-China nonsense, right? That having a nice, maybe difficult in other ways, but more predictable perhaps, is a jurisdiction like BC, where you have a lot, what you're getting yourself into when you have a project in BC, right? So I think that's huge tailwinds for Canadian explorers such as yourself. So what do we have here? I'm going to try to recap this myself, and you tell me what I've missed, right? Fully cashed, $15 million for 2023. Highly prospective land, right, with a proven geological thesis. You already have oodles and oodles of already kind of would be very high grade for a pit resource. Proven met work, 90 to 98%. It'll likely be low capex based on the fact that it's a simple flotation system. You have lots of meters that have been drilled, lots of meters upcoming resource. What else? What am I missing here?
I think that's a pretty good summary. Yeah,
not too bad.
Yeah, pretty spot on.
Yeah, and I mean, this is I try to interview only companies that I myself personally am engaged in, and this is certainly one that catches my eye every time I return to the story. So I think that you're onto something exciting here. Maybe one last one, and again, I can't expect a hard, concrete answer, but you say resource coming out, PEA, still too soon to talk about a PEA.
Yeah, I think that would be the next step post resource. So probably a little ways down the line for us. But again, that would be it's on the horizon, and we're working in that direction.
Mm-hmm. And so we've covered this, but maybe just for the opportunity to say it all in one moment here, just do you want to run through catalysts that we might expect from Thesis over the next 12 to 18 months?
Indeed, yeah. I mean, as we talked about earlier on, I mean, there's still a lot of drill results to come out from last year's drill program. We're going to get those out as soon as we can over the next month or two, and then you're pretty quickly transitioning into a summer drill program where we're looking to do somewhere in that 40,000 meters of drilling again. So continued strong drill results where we're looking to not only expand the known zones of mineralization, but also drilling to make discoveries as well. And you've mentioned a couple of times the word porphyry, and it's not only an epithermal system. We're also chasing a couple of strong porphyry targets as well. So there's some good blue sky potential there for a big system at depth, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe if I may, I was going to give you the final thoughts here, but just one last kick at the can with the porphyry. Is that something that we can expect you to target in 2023?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that was part of the program this year as well, and we're certainly refining those targets, and we as I said, we got two strong, what look to be pretty significant targets. So fingers crossed.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And we've come to the end of my questions. I thought I'd give it to you for parting thoughts or final word.
No, I think you honestly did a great summary a couple of minutes ago. And if I was to cycle back, I think I'd probably just go back to the question that you started off with, what is the elevator pitch? And I think you recapped that pretty nicely, but it's, the key takeaways are, we own this project 100%. It's in a fantastic jurisdiction. It's an emerging mining camp, the Toodoggone. I think, Benchmark really kind of set the stage for what is possible here with a multi-million ounce deposit near surface. I think our project has just as much potential. We've got a great shareholder base, tight tight share structure, 15 million in the treasury, and we're looking to do a big drill program this year. So a lot of catalysts near term, and as we've talked about quite a bit, we're working towards that maiden resource.
Perfect. Well, Ewan, thank you for your time. I think that's it from me. For anybody who, if this has piqued your curiosity and you want to learn more, please head over to thesisgold.com. They have a strong website, lots of great information there. As for me, you can find me under the name Junior Resource Investing on Spotify or YouTube or wherever you like to go for your podcasts. Ewan, I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on here.
My pleasure. Thanks.